Hey guys. This one is a complete story. This is what if Naruto lost his memories. With his memory of the past 5 years missing, Naruto must decide if his life has led him to a place he wants to be. He never expected to be married to Hinata Hyuga, and now he must navigate through the maze that is their life together with no memory of how he got there. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start.
We are pain, that's all. We are God.
Chapter 1. The first thing he was aware of was a wonderful, warm smell teasing his nose. It had a slight spice to it, and drew him from the clutching grasp of sleep. Cinnamon. As the spicy sweet aroma pulled him further from slumber, his other senses began to wake up. His eyelids glowed red and he squeezed them shut against the bright sunlight he knew waited for him. A soft warmth ran the length of his body from his chin to his ankles. His arm was wrapped around whatever it was pressed against him, and something soft tickled his neck and jawline as he shifted his arm to pull the smooth, soft thing closer to him. As he shifted, so did the thing, and something nudged between his ankles and pressed against the bottom of his calf. The movement dragged him farther from sleep, and he squinted against the bright light streaming through the window. His eyes sluggishly adjusted to the golden light, and he looked down into his arms as whatever it was he was holding shifted again. His nose was buried in what he could only assume was a mass of shiny black hair, tousled and hiding the face pressed against his bare chest. His mind immediately snapped to attention, and only years of shinobi training kept him from scrambling gracelessly from the bed in shock and surprise. His eyes darted around the room trying to gather information. He spotted a garish lamp sitting on a short bedside table on his partner's, the other side of the bed. Beyond that, the stretch of sky he could see through the window hinted at a beautiful day. Clothes lay scattered about the room, on the floor, the chair in the corner, and the chest of drawers against the wall opposite the foot of the bed, and he became abruptly aware that the only thing he was wearing was a bed sheet and this strange woman. His situation was becoming increasingly bleak, and he decided he had best make a hasty exit and figure out where the hell he was. With agonizing care, he slowly extracted his arm from under the woman's head and slipped his foot out from under her own. His back was to her, and his feet had just hit the carpet when he heard a murmur behind him. His body locked up and he couldn't move. "Naruto?" he heard as gentle fingers pressed into the small of his back. Like he had been electrocuted, the man leaped off the bed and spun to face his bedmate. What he saw and what his brain told him was in the realm of possibility were not agreeing. With his abrupt exit from the bed, the woman had startled from her relaxed position against the pillows. Her back was straight up, dark tousled hair reaching distractingly to her waist, and a hand rested on the bed, where he had just been, to support her. Bright white Byakugan eyes watched him worriedly, but all that registered in his mind was that she was topless and making no attempt to cover herself. Again, his brain snapped to attention like a rubber band, and he immediately turned on his heel to preserve some of her decency. At the same time, he couldn't help but look back at her, if only to confirm it actually was her. At least, that's what he told himself. "Hinata?" His voice sounded an octave or two higher than it should have as he peeked through his fingers before spinning around again and slapping a hand over his eyes. "Naruto, are you all right?" Her soft voice drifted to him, practically begging him to turn to look at her again. He nearly did before the image of what was behind his back swam before his eyes and he bit his cheek. The hand over his eyes slid up his face and into his hair, where he grabbed the blonde locks and pulled hard. He was facing the door of what he could only assume was a hotel room, and just to the left of it he saw a bathroom sink through another door. He bolted into the bathroom and slammed the door shut, ignoring the woman calling his name behind him. His hands grasped the edges of the sink, and he exhaled a harsh breath. His knees felt a little shaky and he crouched, pressing the cool linoleum against his forehead, and continued to regulate his breathing. After a moment he felt better and rose to his full height to stare at himself in the mirror. The first thing he noticed was the net of marks on his chest. His brow knit together as he examined them closer. Running down his chest were lines and lines, in groups of 4, like he had scratched too hard but not broken the skin. A group of lines disappeared over his shoulder, and he twisted his spine to try to see his back. He found the same pattern of 4 lines crisscrossing all over his back. He couldn't get a good view, but he could tell there were more there than on his chest. Naruto had not spent 3 years with one of the biggest perverts in the Fire Country without picking up some basic, and not so basic, knowledge. He had apparently spent an incredibly passionate night with that woman just outside the door. He racked his brain, over and over, searching everywhere, but came up with nothing. He couldn't remember anything. How, in Kami's name, had he, Naruto Uzumaki, ended up in some hotel room with Hinata Hyuga? His hands were gripping the sink again, so tightly his knuckles were white. He looked up from the drain to search his face in the mirror, desperate for something. Blue eyes stared back at him through shaggy blonde bangs. Again, his brows knitted together. Something was off. He couldn't exactly put his finger on it at first, and his eyes roved over his face trying to identify what was wrong. Slowly, almost doubtfully, he began taking notes of observations. His hair was long. Not excessively long, but longer than he usually wore it. It wasn't quite as long as his father had worn his blonde mop, but it was coming close. His jaw was just slightly more defined. His nose slightly more prominent. And although when he relaxed his face they disappeared, the laugh lines around his eyes seemed just a bit deeper. Although it was absolutely absurd, his brain kept pushing him to the same conclusion. He looked older. Completely unbidden, the image of Hinata swam before his eyes. He flinched, recoiling at the idea of looking at one of his childhood friends in such a manner, and then his brain began looking at details again. There was no doubt it was Hinata. It was impossible to mistake those big, white eyes, and that long dark mane. But again, his brain began picking things apart, suggesting the impossible. He was imagining things. Again he caught his reflection in the mirror, and he couldn't deny that he looked different. But he smothered the idea that Hinata was different. He would go out there, he would look her in the face, and she would be the same old Hinata. She would look like an 18-year-old girl, not older. Nodding firmly to himself, he wrapped his hand around the doorknob before he remembered she was on the other side of that door, stark naked. He faltered for a moment, and then shook his head, steely determination returning. He cracked the door and peeked out. Hinata sat on the far side of the bed, her back to him but digging through a small bag. Once again steeling himself, he called to her. "H. Hinata?" She looked up at him over her shoulder and nearly turned around, but he shied away from the door and told her not to move. He could see her eyebrows draw together under her bangs, but she obeyed. "Can you put something on?" he asked, cursing himself for sounding so uncertain. "And bring me a pair of pants?" he added bashfully. "Oh. Okay." She tilted her head, looking confused but nodded. Naruto shied behind the door again as she rose to her feet and waited. After a moment she appeared at the door and held out a pair of dark Jonin pants to him. She had covered herself with a shirt that was obviously not hers because the sleeves were rolled halfway up her forearms, and the hem managed to cover half of her thighs. It was obviously broader than her small frame and hung off her shoulders and around her hips like a cloak. He snatched the pants through the small crack in the door, muttering a quick thanks, and slipped them on, trying to ignore the fact that her shirt was obviously his, before gingerly stepping out of the bathroom. Hinata looked up at him worriedly and reached for his hand, backing up into the room. He couldn't think of a tactful way to avoid her, so he followed. He ignored the voice in his head cataloging her slightly more mature and drop-dead gorgeous features, elegant forearms, pretty, full lips, sophisticated cheekbones. Heaving another slightly painful breath, he decided to just jump right in. "Hinata, where are we?" Again, Hinata's head tilted to the side a little and her worried expression was joined by one of confusion. "We're at the Tiger's Iron. We're only about 4 hours' walk from Konoha." Her voice was soft and calming, but she couldn't keep the worry out of it entirely. "Naruto, what's going on?" How was he supposed to answer that question? How was he supposed to tell her that he had no idea how he had gotten here or what had happened before he had fallen asleep last night? He took a step back from her and rubbed his palms over his face, trying to think. She raised a hand to him, not quite sure how to help, and in true fashion, Naruto's infamous lack of concentration zeroed in on a new detail. The bright warm light filtering in through the window winked off of the modest diamond and pearl ring on her left hand. Naruto swore violently, turning away and startling Hinata. "What the hell happened?" he demanded, frantically spinning around to face her again. "What were we thinking?" "You're married," he keened, more to himself than to her. "Why would I can't." He was beginning to panic. The Hyuga clan would not take kindly to his affair with their princess, and he didn't even want to think about whoever her husband was. Unexpectedly, his attention was arrested again. Hinata had strode toward him and firmly grasped his face in both of her hands, forcing him to look at her. "Naruto, what is going on?" she asked him desperately. He found himself falling into her beautiful deep eyes and didn't know what to do with his hands. They fluttered in the air, trying to decide if they should land on her hips or her shoulders or just hang limply at his sides. Hinata's fingertips briefly pressed into the edges of his face to call his attention back before she asked again, "Naruto, what is wrong? Talk to me." "I don't know," he answered honestly and earnestly. "I have no idea where I am. I don't know how I got here, or why you're here, or why we were in bed together, or what the hell is going on." Her hands dropped from his face, and a slightly hurt expression swam in her eyes. "That's not funny," she told him, taking a step back. He looked at her helplessly, shaking his head. "I didn't mean for it to be," he promised, not entirely sure if he should step away from her again or wrap her in his arms and hug her. She looked like she had just been told her puppy had died. She didn't say anything for a long time. She just stared at him uncertainly, her arms wrapped tightly around her. Naruto had no idea what to do, so he waited. Finally she spoke. "Do you know who I am?" The question was so unexpected it threw him for a moment. But the fact that he was confident in his answer helped calm him. "Of course. You're Hinata Hyuga," he answered, a grin taking over his mouth. It faded when she continued to stare at him, and dropped altogether when she slowly shook her head. "Naruto," she began gently, again that concern washing over her face. "I've been Hinata Uzumaki for the last 4 years. I only use my maiden name when I deal with clan matters." It was his turn to not say anything for a long time. What could he say in answer to that? Slowly, he began to shake his head, and for the first time he noticed a smooth platinum band around his ring finger, twinkling up at him merrily. He was only 18. That wasn't possible. And he told her. "Hinata, 4 years ago, we were 14 years old. I wasn't even in the village 4 years ago." His stomach sank into his toes when she started shaking her head again. "We were 19 4 years ago. Naruto, I know you remember this. We spent the last week celebrating our anniversary. You planned the whole thing." She looked desperate and confused and very, very hurt. He helplessly shook his head again. "I don't remember any of that. I'm sorry." And he was. Watching the helplessness and confusion and fear play across her face twisted his gut violently. Her eyes pinched shut, and she covered her face with both hands for a moment. Her shoulders lifted as she heaved in a big sigh and slowly released it before dropping her hands and looking back at him. "Naruto, I need to talk to Kurama right now." Hinata's face was completely serious, and Naruto faltered for a moment. He hated to deny Hinata anything, especially right now when they had no idea what was going on but this. "Hinata. He's changed a lot, but he's still not very social," Naruto began before Hinata cut him off. "I've met him before." That was the last thing Naruto expected to hear. He gaped at her, completely flabbergasted, but Hinata ignored his shock. "Naruto, this is important. If he remembers anything, maybe he can figure out what happened to you." Naruto grimaced, trying to think of an excuse. He and Kurama were comrades now, friends even, but that didn't mean he was comfortable relinquishing control in front of Hinata. Kurama was not always inclined to be civil, even with Naruto. Hinata's resolute expression never wavered, and Naruto accepted his fate. "All right, I'll see if he'll talk, but I'm not making any promises." Hinata nodded and waited, staring at him intently. Taking a deep breath, Naruto retreated into his mind. Before him, A huge mass of coppery fur shifted slightly before going still. Naruto frowned and called Kurama's name but got no response. He tried again with little success. "Hey! Fur ball!" Naruto yelled, trying to elicit any sort of reaction. A deep growl answered him, and one rusty red eye squinted open to glare at him. It closed again, and Kurama buried his nose in one of his tails. "Go away, Naruto. I'm in the middle of a very well-deserved nap." "Well-deserved?" Naruto squawked. "What the hell have you done to deserve a nap recently?" Kurama growled at him again. "You're the one that told me to give you and your mate some privacy." Naruto felt his ears burn as a blush flared in his cheeks at Kurama's implication. A moment later he realized the absurdity of being embarrassed in front of the demon sealed in his gut, and his temper flickered a bit. "Look, could you just not be an ass for a few minutes? I need your help. Do you remember Hinata? Do you remember she's my wife?" Kurama's eye cracked open again, but he made no other move. Naruto sighed wearily and said, "Look, I woke up about a half hour ago next to a woman who claims to be my wife, and I don't remember ever having a relationship with her." Kurama raised his head and looked squarely at Naruto, his interest piqued. "Hinata wants to talk with you. She thinks you might be able to figure something out. Will you talk to her?" A sense of pleasure practically oozed off of Kurama at the prospect of a conversation with Hinata, setting Naruto on edge. "I would like nothing better than to chat with your mate," Kurama drawled, a lazy grin exhibiting his impressive fangs. Again, alarms rang in Naruto's better sense of judgment, and he eyed the fox suspiciously. Kurama rolled his eyes, balancing his chin on one paw. "Relax, I'm not going to damage her," he assured. "Much." When a Rasengan flickered to life in Naruto's hand, Kurama straightened up, his arms crossing at the wrists. "You are on edge, kid. What's gotten you so out of sorts?" A seriousness had taken over Kurama now as he stared down at his host. "You've trusted me around her before and I've never hurt her. What's happened to you?" Naruto glared at Kurama for a moment longer before letting the Rasengan fizzle out. "I told you," he snarled, "I don't know what the hell is going on. Will you behave?" "Impeccably," Kurama answered, acerbically, but seriously. It was always a bit of a shock when red eyes stared out at her from where blue usually was. Kurama shifted, passing his weight from foot to foot, and his head tilted to the side a bit as he looked Hinata up and down, taking in every detail. It should have been unnerving, being assessed by a demon, especially when she was wearing nothing but Naruto's shirt, but Hinata felt no malevolence from the creature residing in her husband. Kurama did this every time he talked to her. He checked her over, making sure she was physically healthy and that she was, if not happy, at least not upset. For reasons he had never revealed, Kurama liked Hinata, and he held a protectiveness and possessiveness for her that rivaled Naruto's own. Hinata guessed it had something to do with viewing her as a part of his pack as Naruto had once described it. Kurama stalked toward her, a predatory smile that didn't really have any malice in it resting on his lips, showing an impressive set of incisors. When he was so close Hinata had to lean back to meet his eyes. He stopped but still leaned into her, his nose gently nuzzling into her ear. "It's been a while, mate," he murmured in a low purr. Again, where anyone else would have felt threatened, Hinata was unconcerned. Kurama was a demon, but he was a fox demon, and he had more than one aspect of the vulpine creature woven into his personality. His advance on her, and his complete lack of personal boundaries, was not meant to be sexual or threatening. He, like Naruto, was simply an incredibly physical creature, and he was greeting Hinata in a normal fashion. He called her mate simply because she was his host's mate, and aside from him, she was the closest Kurama had ever come to humans. After a moment Kurama pulled his face from hers, but did not step back. They had been standing chest to chest when he had leant into her, and only a small sliver of space stood between them now. He stared down at her seriously, and searched her face for a moment more before speaking. "Naruto said you wished to speak to me?" He raised an eyebrow cockily, still teasing her a bit. Hinata ignored his teasing and nodded her head. "Do you have any idea what is going on? Do you know what could have caused him to lose his memory?" Kurama was shaking his head before her questions were fully out. "I wasn't even aware anything had happened. He asked me to give you two some privacy for your anniversary, and I've been napping the whole time. What is going on? Hinata's shoulders slumped, and she dropped her head to rest against his collarbone, partly to hide the blush that flared in her cheeks at his casual mention of their sex life and partly because she was quickly losing hope. The fox may have been in control at the moment, but it was still her husband's body, and she drew comfort from the small contact. After a moment, Hinata steeled herself and looked up again into those rust-colored eyes. He woke up this morning and was acting strange, but I didn't think anything of it at first. Then he started asking questions like where we were and why and what we were doing together. Kurama's eyes narrowed as he listened to her patiently. I think he thought we were having an affair. He truly doesn't remember you. Kurama's voice was low and harsh, a growl rumbling under his words. The boy has forgotten his own mate? Hinata nearly stumbled away from him, shocked in the face of his anger. It felt like a physical heat wave rolling off of him, and his eyes unfocused, staring at something she couldn't see as his mind worked furiously. Kurama turned away from her sharply, beginning to pace back and forth. And your cub, what about him? Has Naruto forgotten him as well? Kurama asked snappishly, looking to Hinata, his face twisted in an expression she couldn't quite name. If he doesn't even remember our marriage, I doubt he remembers our son, Hinata reasoned softly. Kurama's pacing stopped, but instead of the anxious, energetic moving, he now stood unnaturally still, not a single hair moving, as he glared at a wall. For nearly 3 minutes he did not move, just stared at the wall as he turned things over in his head, and Hinata began to get nervous. She had never seen Kurama this agitated before. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Kurama slowly turned to face her, a deep frown on his face. Something is very wrong, he said lowly, his dark eyes meeting Hinata's. Rather than pointing out the obviousness of that statement, Hinata chose to hold her peace and wait. Some ties in this world run too deeply to simply be forgotten. The fact that Naruto has forgotten you, and your cub, cannot just be a coincidence. Something happened to make him forget. Hinata could feel the shock on her face. Something had made all of this happen. Something had purposely happened to destroy her entire life? Kurama continued working things over. You and your son are more important to Naruto than anything. He has dreamed of a family since he understood what one was, and you were the one to finally give it to him. The bond that ties you to him cannot be explained with your words, or in any mortal language. It is a bond on such a level that even my kind would recognize it and honor it. I told you once that you were always meant to be with him. You and he are linked by something far greater than your flimsy marriage contracts or words or any other human recognition, and the fact that that has been erased from his mind is not just happenstance. Hinata's eyes refocused when she felt hands on her shoulders, and she looked up to meet Kurama's eyes. He gently forced her to sit on the bed before she collapsed and knelt in front of her. If that's true, she whispered, that we were made for each other, then how has he forgotten me? Miserable white eyes met intense red. I have a feeling he hasn't entirely. The mind remembers some things and leaves the body to remember others. You are such an integral part of Naruto that in order to erase you entirely, the memory of his body would have to be destroyed as well as the mind. Kurama's intense eyes seemed to try to convey comfort without really knowing how. He grimaced and then spoke again. I'll see what I can do. I'll look around on the inside and see if I can find anything. It will take time and I can't promise I'll find anything, but I will try. Don't give up on him now, Hinata. It was one of the handful of times Kurama had called her by her name, and Hinata instantly felt a sense of calm wash over her. He needs you now more than ever. Without another word, Kurama's eyes slid shut and opened to reveal bright azure. Naruto's eyes roamed her figure just as Kurama had, checking that she was all right before he asked, "What happened? Did he know anything?" Hinata gave him an odd look and Naruto explained. The bastard blocked me. He wouldn't let me hear what you were talking about. He didn't have any answers. He'll look around and see if anything has changed on the inside, but he said he'll need time. We need to get back to the village, she told him certainly. I don't know what has happened to you, but we need to get you to Tsunade. He wasn't about to object to that. Hinata flew around the room collecting personal effects and tossing them into the 2 bags against the wall, and within 10 minutes they were on the road speeding toward Konoha. Chapter 2. Hinata hurried him through the village to the hospital, not wasting time to stop at home and drop off their bags. She needed Tsunade or Sakura to figure out what was wrong with her husband immediately. She led him to the front desk of the hospital and was about to ask if Tsunade or Sakura were in when the pink-haired medic herself slipped behind the desk and began organizing a file. "Sakura!" Hinata exclaimed, relieved. The medic looked up, surprised for a moment, and then a smile slipped across her face. "Hey, Hinata, Naruto! Welcome home, you two. We didn't expect you until later this afternoon." She quickly stepped out from behind the desk and wrapped Hinata in a warm hug. She was about to do the same thing to Naruto, but was stalled by Hinata. "We need your help." When Sakura gave her a confused look, Hinata elaborated. "Something happened to Naruto." Sakura's green eyes shot to the blonde standing next to her sheepishly, but Hinata cut her off again. "We aren't entirely sure what's going on. Can we go somewhere more private?" Sakura led them up the stairs to the third floor and down the hall. She was about to let them into her office when Tsunade stepped out of a room and spotted her favorite shinobi. She greeted them cheerily but took note of the oddly shy way Naruto was holding himself and asked if everything was okay. "Naruto seems to have lost his memory," Hinata told her haltingly. Tsunade's sharp eyes whipped to Naruto, and he shrugged at her sheepishly. "We don't know how it happened or why, but he woke up this morning and had no idea what was going on. Could you give him an examination?" Tsunade gave the worried young woman a warm smile and began ushering Naruto down the hall. "Of course, Hinata. We'll get this sorted out." Sakura made to follow but was once again stopped by Hinata. "Sakura, I need your help with something else." 2 hours later, Hinata stood against the wall outside an examination room. She couldn't help nervously wringing her hands, no matter how many times Sakura told her everything would be okay. Her fingers fretfully twisted her wedding ring on her finger. After what seemed like an age, Tsunade stepped out of the room, shouting back at Naruto to stay put. "Sakura, could you go distract him while I talk to Hinata?" she asked wearily. Her young prodigy nodded and shot Hinata another comforting smile before pushing off from the wall and slipping into the room. Tsunade turned back to Hinata once the door was closed. "You were right, a part of his memory is missing." Only years of Hyuga upbringing kept Hinata from crumpling against the wall. "He doesn't seem to have even a shred of memory from about the last 5 years or so. He remembers the war ending and coming home for a bit, but that's it," Tsunade continued. "Is there any reason this might have happened? Did he have any accidents? Bump his head while you two were traveling?" Hinata was already shaking her head before the first question was fully out. "No," she said earnestly. "Nothing happened. We just visited Waterfall. He didn't even train, he never hit his head, he wasn't sick. He just woke up this morning completely confused. I think he thought we were having an affair or something. He started panicking when he noticed my wedding ring. I spoke to Kurama this morning, and as far as I can tell, whatever happened to Naruto hasn't affected him. He remembered me, he asked about Jiraiya, he wasn't confused about where we were or anything. He had no idea what could have happened, and he promised to try to find something, but he said it will take time." "He doesn't remember anything in the last 5 years?" she asked desperately. Tsunade frowned and shook her head. "No, nothing. He kept asking me if I was sure you two were married. He wouldn't shut up until I told him I had been at the shrine and witnessed the whole thing." Hinata's head sagged forward. Her fingers slipped up under her bangs and pulled them back from her brow, tugging gently. "What am I supposed to tell Jiraiya?" she asked herself weakly. Before she could even begin to search for an answer, the door to Naruto's room slammed open, and he came storming out, shaking Sakura off and turning to yell at the Hokage. However, before he could get very far, everyone's attention was turned down to the end of the hall. "Mama!" At the top of the stairs stood a blonde toddler. He was waving frantically, and when Hinata turned to look, he dashed forward as fast as his little legs could carry him. With the boundless confidence only young children have, the little blonde boy reached Hinata and literally hurled his small body into her arms. She caught him, just barely, and lifted him to her hip, brushing bright blonde hair out of bright blue eyes. "Jiraiya, what are you doing here?" she asked him softly. She was acutely aware of Naruto's shocked eyes on her, and braced herself. "Kurnai and Sammy brought me to see Kiba and Maru," he informed her in an excited shout. A stubby finger pointed back at the staircase where Kurina Yuhi and her daughter Asami were slowly walking toward the group. "Why are you here, Mama?" Kurnai said. "You and Papa will be home till night." "Hi, Papa," he said, waving happily to Naruto over Hinata's shoulder. Panic gripped Hinata again as her eyes shot to Naruto, worried how he would react. The shock on his face was still obvious, and he didn't seem capable of tearing his eyes away from the toddler, but he cracked a small smile and gave a little wave back. "Excuse me for a minute," she said timidly before briskly walking away from the group, her son still in her arms. Again he waved over her shoulder at everyone and softly said a half-hearted bye-bye, Papa. Hinata turned the corner, and then gently lowered Jiraiya to the ground and crouched down to his level. Before she could say anything, the toddler asked, "Why'd we leave, Papa?" "I want a hug," he told her timidly. Hinata closed her eyes briefly, trying to ignore the sound of her heart breaking, and gently smoothed down Jiraiya's wild golden spikes. "I know, Froggy," she told him gently. Jiraiya peeked up at her through his bangs. The boy was practically Naruto's doppelganger, loud, bright, personality and all, right up until he thought he had done something wrong and was in trouble. Then he let loose every ounce of Hinata's timidity he could have possibly inherited. "But Papa's not feeling too good right now." Jiraiya's bright blue eyes widened, almost comically, and his little mouth popped open. "What's wrong with him?" he asked, stepping closer to his mother and fidgeting restlessly. Her mouth twisted into a grimace that she tried to turn into a smile, but she wasn't sure how successful it really was. "We're not really sure. That's why he's here to see Lady Tsunade and Sakura. They're going to make him all better, okay?" Jiraiya nodded quickly and smiled at his mother happily. "Don't worry, Mama. Nade and Sakura'll make Papa better and then he can come home with us," he consoled sagely, taking extra care over Sakura's name. Hinata tried for a smile again, with a bit more success, and scooped her toddler up in her arms, hugging him tightly. When she rounded the corner again, only Tsunade, Kurenai, and Asami were waiting for her. As she walked back down the hallway, Hinata caught sight of the clock on the wall and wilted a bit. "Lady Tsunade filled me in," Kurenai said when Hinata was close enough. She stepped forward and wrapped her old student and the toddler in a warm hug for a moment before stepping back. "Kurenai-sensei, I hate to ask, but could you watch Jiraiya for a bit longer?" Hinata pleaded. "Naruto and I were hoping to be home an hour ago at the latest because I had a meeting with the elders that started 15 minutes ago." Kurenai wordlessly held her hands out to take the toddler, and Tsunade waved Hinata away. "Go on, there's not much you can do here anyway. I want to keep Naruto here and run some tests, see if we can find anything. Come back after your meeting and we'll figure out what to do then." So with a warm pat on the shoulder, Hinata was shooed out of the hospital. A deep exhaustion seemed to have settled into Hinata's very bones. She wanted nothing more than to crawl into bed with her husband on one side and her son on the other, and just forget everything, but that wasn't possible. Even if Naruto's memory somehow reappeared, she still had to make it through this council meeting, and being a half-hour late she knew the elders would not be pleased. Bracing herself, Hinata slid open the door and slipped inside. Immediately every eye in the room was on her, and she had to force herself not to cringe away from some of the not-so-subtly concealed glares. Holding her back and shoulders straight, Hinata marched to her place at her father's side. "I'm glad to see you were finally able to join us, Hinata," bit Kimiko, a rigidly traditional old elder who had been upset with Hinata ever since her decision to marry outside of the clan. "I apologize, honored elders. An emergency came up and I was delayed at the hospital." A few of the elders grumbled, but most took her excuse in their stride. Hinata noticed her father shift as if he was going to ask her to elaborate but didn't say anything. The council dove back into the matters they had been discussing without much hesitation, and Hinata did her best to pay attention as the hours dragged by. The entire reason she had been invited to this meeting was to learn how things ran so that she would be prepared to take over for her father one day. But it was hard to focus on the droning elders when her mind kept drifting back to the hospital. Her attention was seized when she heard her name. "Hinata, how long until you return to the estate?" Kimiko asked briskly. Inside, Hinata's stomach plummeted. She had completely forgotten about the move. Naruto and I planned on returning to the estate next week, but some things have come up that may delay our plans. She had absolutely no intention of telling the elders what had happened that morning, but she would be incredibly surprised if she managed to move her family back into the Hyuga compound with Naruto in his condition. She had no illusions that the elders wouldn't find out, but she wanted to delay the matter until she had her feet under her again. Another excuse? Kimiko asked smugly. First you were pregnant. Then you said your child was too young to be uprooted. Then your husband was away on a mission for 2 months, and now another crisis has come up. Honestly, child, do you have any intention of returning to your family's house? If you are to be the head of this clan after your father, you should live within the clan. Enough, Kimiko, Hayashi ordered. Hinata will return to the estate when she is ready. I'm sure you remember how chaotic life can be with an active shinobi husband and a young child. If something has come up, then there is nothing else for it. If that is all, then I believe we are done here. Hayashi's words implied that he would listen to any other business, but the tone in his voice strongly warned against it. Whatever else they may be, the elders of the Hyuga clan were not idiots. Speaking quietly among themselves, the council filtered out of the room. As the last few elders meandered out of the doors, Hinata slowly let out a controlled breath. Her eyes closed as she tried vainly to ward off a headache. As her fingers dug into her temples, she felt a large warm hand on her shoulder and looked up into her father's face. Although he was still a relatively young man and had aged well, the life of a shinobi had taken its toll on Hayashi, and the lines around his face grew deeper by the year. His once smooth forehead was not quite wrinkled, but it was easy to tell where lines would appear when he frowned. However, over the years since the war, the lines around his mouth and eyes had also deepened and appeared now as he smiled down at his eldest daughter gently. Is there something you need to tell me about, Hinata? He asked mildly. If he noticed her small cringe, he didn't comment on it, and when she nodded, he motioned for her to rise and led her through the halls to his study. Like the rest of the compound, Hayashi's study was a regal-looking room. Light grays and tans contrasted pleasantly in the sparsely decorated room, and bookshelves took up most of the walls, filled completely with old tomes and scrolls. Hayashi motioned for Hinata to sit before his desk and made himself comfortable before looking at her expectantly. Hinata bit the inside of her lip, trying to put her thoughts in order. I am sorry I was late for the meeting, father. Naruto and I made it back to the village in time, but something has happened and I had to see him to the hospital. Hayashi's keen eyes never left her face as he nodded once in acknowledgement, and he said, Yes, you mentioned something about that when you arrived. What happened? Is your husband injured? Hinata grimaced and tried not to fidget. Not exactly. She cursed herself for making it into a question. He was perfectly fine last night, but when he woke up this morning, Lady Tsunade examined him when we arrived and told me he has no memory of the last 5 years or so. Hinata watched her father carefully for his reaction and was not disappointed. It was perhaps a testament to how unexpected her news was, because his eyebrows climbed toward his hairline in surprise. The two of you were barely even courting 5 years ago. Hayashi's voice was soft and gentle, but it still pounded into Hinata like a war hammer. She grimaced again. He doesn't remember that. I did not have much time to speak to Lady Tsunade before I had to leave for the meeting, but she told me that he only remembers the war ending and coming back to the village for a short time. He and I did not begin courting until after he had returned from the other villages a year after the war ended. Hinata was relying heavily on her upbringing to remain calm and concise as she explained what she knew to her father, but it was becoming increasingly difficult to stave off the panic she felt. She wanted nothing more than to run back to the hospital and hope the Hokage would have more information for her, but she needed to clear things up with her father first. Hinata could see the gears turning in her father's head as he thought over the situation. Finally, he seemed to come to a decision and looked up at her again. We should wait before making any decisions until we know more. I will accompany you back to the hospital, and we will see if there is anything else for Lady Tsunade to tell us, and then we will form a plan. Hayashi's voice was all business, and although it would have seemed detached and clinical to most, Hinata took comfort in the familiarity of it. As he made to rise from his seat, though, she motioned for him to wait. There's more. She absolutely dreaded making this situation worse, but she couldn't tell her husband at the moment, so her father was the next best thing. I'm pregnant again. If she thought she had surprised her father before, it was nothing compared to the shock on his face this time. Hinata, he whispered, sympathy and sadness she rarely heard from him apparent in his voice. He searched for something to say and finally asked, Had you told him? Hinata shook her head and looked at the floor. We decided we wanted to try for another child a few months ago, but I didn't suspect anything until after we had left last week. When Lady Tsunade was examining Naruto, I asked Sakura to check and she confirmed my suspicions. I want to be happy for this, and on some level I am, but I can't help but worry how this will complicate things even more. Where is Jiraiya? Her father asked, turning the attention to her son. Kurenai-sensei was watching him while Naruto and I were away. She has him now, but I can't ask her to keep him any longer now that Naruto and I are back. He saw us at the hospital and he'll be impossible until we bring him home, but I don't know what to do. I can't tell him his own father has no idea who he is. The panic from before began to bubble up from her stomach again, and before she knew it, her father was kneeling before her, his hands on her shoulders, looking her in the eye. Everything will be all right, Hinata, he told her, one hand smoothing down her dark hair. If it becomes an issue, Jiraiya can stay here with Hanabi and I until this all gets sorted out. First things first, we need to go to the hospital and see where things stand. Taking comfort in her father's calm confidence, Hinata nodded, wiped away the few tears that had escaped her eyes, and followed him out of the compound. When father and daughter arrived at the hospital, they were quickly directed up to the third floor to the room Naruto had been in. As they walked down the hall, indistinct shouting could be heard from the direction they were headed before it cut off abruptly. Hayashi rapped on the door twice and waited for an answer before he preceded Hinata into the room. Naruto stood on the opposite side of the room, his face twisted up in a frown and glaring at Tsunade when they entered. His face immediately shifted when he saw the head of the Hyuga clan, and Hinata noticed the color and his face paled slightly. She wanted to run to him and wrap her arms around him, but held herself back. She was vaguely aware of Tsunade greeting her father and put in the valiant effort required to rip her eyes from Naruto in favor of her Hokage. Tsunade ordered Naruto to wait there and ushered the newcomers out of the room and into the hallway again. Hayashi waited patiently as Tsunade updated them on what she had found, but Hinata couldn't stop shifting restlessly. We've got a better idea of where his memory blacks out. Right after the war, he left the village to help the other nations for a time, and the last thing he remembers is visiting the village hidden in the clouds with Killer Bee. The last thing he recalls was training with Bee yesterday. He insists that they didn't do any heavy work, but were experimenting with Kurama's chakra and trying to create new jutsu. He said he wasn't injured, he didn't hit his head, and he wasn't even very tired when he went to bed. Tsunade reeled out the facts in a businesslike fashion all experienced doctors have. Physically, he's fine. There's no reason to believe he has a concussion or anything that hints at where this came from. Hinata wanted to ask if Kurama had found anything yet, but knew it was too soon to expect results, and was relieved when her father took charge and began asking questions. She was about at her wits' end. So what is our next step? He asked, matching Tsunade's businesslike manner. I have run all the tests I can think of and haven't come up with anything, Tsunade admitted, clearly disappointed in the lack of results. Whatever this is, it's not a normal case of retrograde amnesia. I have no reason to keep him locked up in the hospital, and he would just try to escape anyway. I want him to return to his normal routine, and hopefully something will be triggered. Hinata, I want you to take him home for tonight. Hinata's anxiety must have shown on her face because Tsunade placed a gentle hand on her shoulder before she continued. I know it will be strange, but this is the best thing for him right now. He needs to be in familiar places, with familiar things. I'm taking him off the active duty roster, but I want him to keep up his normal routine. Make him get up at his usual time every day, make sure he trains like he normally does, make him interact with people, especially Jiraiya. Hinata bit her lip but straightened her shoulders and nodded. The only thing I don't want you to do is tell him memories when he asks. Hinata felt her eyebrows knit together as she asked, why not? Tsunade sighed and placed her hands on her hips. I don't want to risk tampering with anything. If we start telling him things that have happened in detail, he may just take what we say and fill it in. It won't really be getting anything back, and then if things do come back, he won't know what is real and what isn't. I'd rather he just remember things on his own. You can tell him basics, like that you two are married, and Jiraiya's birthday and where the silverware is, but don't tell him specifics like what happened on your first date, or anything. Hinata nodded her understanding, and then she was ushered back into the room. Naruto was leaning sullenly against the windowsill, his arms crossed over his chest unhappily when they came back in. Well? He asked Tsunade darkly, not moving from his position. Don't take that tone with me, brat, I'm trying to fix you. Naruto looked suitably chastised as Tsunade continued. You're going home for tonight. Hinata is going to help you get back into your normal routine, and with any luck, something will jog your memory. I want you back at the hospital in a week to see if you make any progress, and from there we'll look into other options. For now, you're released. Tsunade turned, gave Hinata one last encouraging smile, and then left. Naruto shifted uncomfortably, his eyes moving between Hinata and her father for a moment before Hayashi spoke. You two had better head home. I believe you have some unpacking to do, Hinata. He is to stay in a familiar place for the time being, and moving back into the compound is not an option for the foreseeable future. Hinata nodded and moved to the corner to gather the dusty traveling bags she had left that morning, vividly aware of Naruto's eyes following her. I'll have to stop at Kurenai-sensei's house to pick up Jiraiya. I'll get him, her father offered, interrupting her smoothly. You two go home and I'll bring him along. Hayashi helped her pick up the second bag, reluctantly leaving it in her hands, and then left after Tsunade, not even glancing at Naruto. Bracing herself, Hinata turned to face her husband tentatively. She felt like she was 12 years old all over again, and couldn't think of what to say. Before she could say anything, he was in front of her, tugging the bags out of her fingers and off her shoulder. I'll get those, you just lead the way. A moment of stunned silence answered him before Hinata shook her head and led the way out of the hospital. Chapter 3. Naruto followed Hinata through unfamiliar streets. The sun was just about to set, and it lit up the Hokage faces brilliantly. Naruto tried to use the mountain to stay oriented as he took in the village. He had left the Leaf a month before to visit the hidden cloud, and while construction had been booming like an anthill, the majority of the village had still been a maze of tents. To see such a difference was throwing him off balance. As a child, Naruto had known every nook and cranny of this village better than most jonin. Not knowing where anything was proved to be an uncomfortable experience. It wasn't too long before Hinata was leading him up a flight of well-lit stairs on the side of an apartment building. She unlocked the front door and ushered him inside. When she flipped on the light, Naruto was greeted with a cheerful living room. A set of couches and a chair surrounded a low table on three sides, with a television and entertainment set on the left with a few boxes stacked next to it. A large archway branched off to his right and led to a shadowy kitchen. Wordlessly, Naruto followed Hinata across the room and down a dark hallway where she flipped on the light in a bedroom at the end and turned to tug the bags from his hand. He watched, not sure what to do with himself, as she set the bags down at the foot of a large bed against the opposite wall and turned to him. A pretty blush dusted the bridge of her nose, and she seemed to have trouble bringing her eyes up to meet his. Would you like dinner? She offered uncertainly. We skipped breakfast this morning, and I doubt you've had time to eat all day. Naruto didn't have much of an appetite, but he nodded his head and thanked her politely. Okay, Hinata answered, moving toward him to slip out the door toward the kitchen. Feel free to look around and see if you recognize anything. I'll be in the kitchen if you need anything. Naruto thanked her, and then just stood awkwardly in the doorway to the bedroom, unsure of what to do. He had never felt more uncomfortable in his life. He fidgeted for a moment, and then, being a man of action, decided to take up her offer and began to look around him. The bedroom was surprisingly spacious considering what he had seen of the apartment was relatively small. The large bed dominated the room, being the obvious focal point, but it wasn't too large for the room. A pretty, darkly polished wood head and footboard reflected the soft light in the room, and the fluffy white comforter invited Naruto to just lie down and sleep so he could stop worrying about everything that had happened. But no matter how inviting the bed looked, the idea that it was his bed, and that he shared it kept him at a distance. Continuing his observation, Naruto noticed two matching nightstands on either side of the bed. The one on the right was cluttered with scraps of paper and various odds and ends, while the one on the left held a picture frame and a small wooden box that he assumed was for jewelry. Set into the wall to the right of the bed was a closet with clothes neatly hung up. In the same wall, an open doorway led to a dark bathroom. Immediately to his left, hugging the wall that the door was in, stood a tall chest of drawers with a mirror on top. It was made of the same darkly polished wood as the bed and nightstands, and the top came up to about his chest. Although Naruto was tall, and he imagined with Hinata's short frame she would only be able to see her shoulders and up in it. The top of the dresser was littered with more photos that he didn't dare look at any closer, a few pieces of jewelry, some money, and other odds and ends. Overall, the room was neat and clean but still had the definite impression of being lived in, and the idea made Naruto slightly uncomfortable. He had lived alone for as long as he could remember, and the idea that he now shared everything including a bedroom with Hinata Hyuga of all people was unfathomable. Shaking his head, he flipped off the light and retreated back out into the dark hall. Just down the hall a few feet, but on the same side, stood two more doors. The one farthest from him was slightly ajar, and from the dim light filtering in from the living room and kitchen he could see it was another bathroom. Resolutely ignoring the pictures hanging on the wall, Naruto crossed the short distance to the last mystery door and peeked inside. He was in no way prepared for what he saw. A small toddler's bed sat in the far corner against the blue wall, and toys lay piled around the edges of the room. Pictures hung on the wall, the bed was neatly made, and a stuffed toad that looked suspiciously like Gamatotsu smiled at him goofily from atop the pillow. When Naruto had seen the little boy at the hospital, his stomach had dropped into his toes. There was no denying the toddler looked exactly like him. For as long as he could remember, Naruto had wanted a family, and the sight of Hinata holding that blonde little boy who could only ever be his son had cut straight to his heart. Naruto couldn't lie to himself and tried to say that he didn't want it. In fact, he knew he wanted it very, very badly. But he was not ready for this. Waking up to a naked woman in his arms had been an inconceivable shock all on its own. Finding out that not only was that naked woman Hinata, but he was married to her, and they had a son together was, well, Naruto wasn't sure he knew the words to describe it. Impossible? Astonishing? Exhilarating? Terrifying? Naruto didn't even know how to act around Hinata, a girl he had known since childhood. He was at a complete loss as to how he would deal with a child he had never met but expected him to act as his father. Naruto knew nothing about being a father, for Kami's sake. He was an orphan. His thoughts tumbled over one another in his head as he once again turned off the light and fled the scene. He peeked around the corner into the kitchen and saw Hinata. She was leaning against the counter by the stove. Something bubbled merrily in a pot and a delicious scent reached his nose, but Naruto couldn't focus on anything but the woman slouched against the counter. The heels of her palms were digging into her eyes, her fingers tangled in her dark bangs. Her shoulders sagged, and Naruto doubted that he had ever seen her more exhausted and defeated than in that moment, as her shoulders shook with a shuddering breath. Naruto would be the first to admit that he did not know Hinata well. They were friends, of course, but he knew virtually nothing about her. He could vividly remember her next to him during the war. Her palm on his cheek had brought him back to himself this morning and reminded him of when she had slapped him when he had nearly given up against Madara after Niji's death. He knew she was strong, and an incredible kunoichi with a dangerous style that contrasted stunningly with her quiet nature. But as a person, he knew very little of her. His mind drifted back to a few days ago, years, now, he amended. Kurama had offered to show him something. Memories of when he had lost control. Naruto never remembered anything when he lost control to the fox, until, of course, he had been tamed. Kurama had offered to show him what had happened those few times, but Naruto had shied away. He could still vividly picture Jiraiya's injuries when he had hurt him, and he still felt his gut twist when he thought about how he had hurt Sakura. But the memory that he was most afraid of seeing was whatever it had been that had triggered him to lose control so completely as to allow 8 tails to form. Naruto could vaguely remember it had something to do with Hinata when he was fighting pain, but whatever had triggered him had been wiped from his memory and he wasn't sure he was ready to face it. From what he did remember of his fight with the Akatsuki leader, Naruto didn't even want to imagine Hinata in the same world as that man. Naruto shook his head and crept away from the corner. Whatever had happened, it didn't matter right now. He had bigger problems to deal with presently. Again, Naruto found himself unsure of what to do. He doubted Hinata would appreciate him intruding on her moment of vulnerability, but having explored the entirety of the apartment beyond a few linen closets, he was at a loss as to what to do with himself. With a steadying breath, Naruto retreated to the hall and forced himself to look at the pictures on the wall, praying something would make sense. The first picture he saw was actually very familiar to him. It was Team 7's original photo and Naruto felt the tension wash out of his shoulders immediately. With a sigh of relief he moved to the next frame. The next was unexpected, but not necessarily surprising. It was actually a few pictures laid out all in one frame. Each photo was of him and Hinata at what he could only assume was their wedding. The largest photo was a candid shot of him kissing her, his hands around her waist to hold her close as he leaned so far into her that her back arched. A smaller picture to the right of it was of them laughing. He had never seen Hinata so animated before. Her head was titled back in a laugh, her eyes shut tight and her mouth was open in a 1,000-watt smile. Naruto could only see half of his own face because the picture him was nuzzling his nose into the side of her neck by her ear, but the grin on his lips was unmistakable. In that picture, Naruto was happier than he could ever remember being. He couldn't deny it. The relationship he now shared with Hinata was so much deeper than what he could remember. Never in his wildest dreams would Naruto have ever imagined he would one day share his life with the quiet, shy, docile Hyuga. The two were simply two different worlds apart. She was the closest thing Konoha had to a princess after Tsunade Senju, and for more than half his life, Naruto had suffered under the heavy mantle of demon. But something had happened to change that. Something had bridged the gap between him and the heiress. For the first time since waking up beside Hinata, Naruto allowed his mind to dwell on the things he could remember. He had been away from the leaf for barely over a month, years ago now. His time spent in Cloud had been fantastic, would have been the best month of his life if it hadn't been for the nightmares. The dreams put Itachi's genjutsu to shame. Naruto had relived the deaths of each of his precious people more times than he could count, only to jolt awake in a cold sweat, twisted and trapped in his bed sheets. Naruto cared for all of his friends, all of the shinobi he had fought beside during the war. He had been shocked, though, by both the frequency and the graphic nature of the visions that featured Hinata, and how deeply they affected him. She had left a deep impression on him. When they were young, she had told him she admired him. She was the first person he could recall telling him such a thing, and it had meant the world to him. As they grew, he had watched her when the opportunity arose, observing how she grew and stood her ground. When she had stood beside him during the war, he didn't know how to describe it. It felt right. If he was honest with himself, Naruto had to admit that Hinata fascinated him. He hadn't been able to get her out of his mind in the months since he had left the leaf. Even ignoring the harrowing things he saw in his dreams, Hinata had become incredibly important to him. A week ago, Naruto had been puzzling over what his new fascination could one day lead to. Now he was standing at that result, in an apartment he evidently shared with her, looking at pictures of their wedding. He felt an ache in his chest as he turned away from the photos. He looked incredibly happy. There was an entire history, a relationship, a life, and he couldn't remember any of it. Naruto tried to shake it off and glanced at the next picture and almost regretted it. The picture was of him, laughing and waving at the camera, and in his arms was that little blonde boy again. He looked slightly confused, but was following his father's example and waving at the camera as well, one arm hooked over Naruto's shoulder to keep his balance. If Naruto had required any more proof that Hinata's little boy was his son, this was it. Actual proof that Naruto had memories with that beautifully perfect little boy. He looked maybe a year old, and Naruto wanted more than ever to just remember. He wanted to remember that little boy and holding him and laughing with him and playing and… Naruto? Naruto jumped a bit and whipped around to face Hinata. She leaned against the wall at the end of the hallway, looking at him gently, if a bit shyly. She seemed to have wrestled her emotions into place because the broken woman he had spied in the kitchen was gone. In her place stood familiar, timidly confident Hinata. "Dinner is ready," she told him softly. Yeah? Okay. Great," he sputtered, trying to push enthusiasm into his voice instead of feeling like he had just been caught doing something wrong or weird. Hinata gave him a small smile before turning away and leading him into the kitchen. On the table were 2 place settings carefully laid out, and when Naruto stepped up to the table his heart leapt. Ramen! Real deal, bona fide, homemade ramen. The appetite Naruto had doubted before was instantly at the front of his mind, and he and Hinata sat down quickly. He thanked her for the food and then dug into what was possibly the most delicious bowl of ramen he had ever tasted. Ichiraku ramen was incredible ramen. In fact, for most of his life, Naruto had sworn it was the best ramen in the world. As he slurped noodles into his mouth, he amended that statement. This ramen was indescribable. He inhaled his first bowl and Hinata quickly motioned for him to help himself to more, a small smile on her face. He controlled himself a bit with his second bowl. Instead of inhaling it, he merely scarfed it. But he did notice that Hinata wasn't really eating much. She sat across from him, her chopsticks slowly swirling the noodles around and only taking a small bite every once in a while. Although the pot in the middle of the table called to him, Naruto set his chopsticks down after his second bowl and looked at the young woman across from him. "Hey, Hinata?" he asked quietly, suddenly feeling shy and timid again. What was it about her that made him feel so small? She immediately looked up at him expectantly, her incredible pearly eyes completely focused on him. He wasn't sure how to continue, slightly disarmed by her attentive gaze, but forged ahead anyway. "I'm still really lost. Can I maybe ask some questions?" Hinata's open face showed surprise for a moment before she nodded quickly and said, "Of course. Ask anything." She faltered for a moment, and then continued, "Lady Tsunade asked that I not tell you some things. She doesn't want me to fill in memories for you because it might confuse you more if your memory does come back. But I'll try to answer your questions." Naruto nodded, a bit disappointed. "No memories, huh? All right, something easy then." "Exactly, how old am I?" he asked, and found himself surprisingly afraid of the answer. "You turned 23 5 months ago," she answered promptly. Naruto was becoming increasingly more familiar with the uncomfortable feeling like he'd just been hit by a chidori. He was 23? How could he possibly be 23? He really was missing 5 years of his life. He sat for a few moments, trying to wrap his head around the concept before he simply let it go. He could dwell on it later. Information now. When did we? Again, Naruto was finding it incredibly difficult to get his question out of his mouth because he was terrified of what the answer would be. He tried again. How long have we been married? A bittersweet smile settled on Hinata's lips as one hand idly played with a chopstick. 4 years and 3 days. At Naruto's startled expression, she blushed deeply and dropped her eyes to the table, the fingers of her left hand fiddling with the ring there. "I only know the day because our anniversary was 3 days ago," she bashfully added, as if she was embarrassed. Suddenly Naruto felt cruel for the way he had acted that morning. He did not remember the last 4 years with her. He didn't remember being her husband. And this poor, sweet girl had gone to sleep last night beside an obviously loving husband and woken up to him acting like a man. Since the moment he had been awake enough to realize there was a woman in his bed, he had felt lost and alone and scared and helpless, and he knew that no jutsu could help him. And it struck him suddenly that she must feel exactly the same way. Except she now had to try to explain what was going on to everyone, including an innocent little boy who probably wouldn't understand why his father didn't know how to be his father anymore. His next question was out of his mouth before he'd even fully thought it. "What about Jiraiya?" Naruto's voice rose on the last word, questioning the name itself as much as asking about the toddler. Using that name for someone other than his beloved master was Naruto wasn't entirely sure how to describe it. It brought back a bit of pain, was simply downright strange, but also gave him a small warm glow in his chest, knowing that the old Toad Sage's legacy continued beyond his pervy books. He wondered vaguely what on earth he had said to convince Hinata to agree to the name. Naruto noticed Hinata suck in a small, tense breath at the mention of her son. Resolutely, she pressed on. He's two. He's the happiest toddler in the world, and the best little boy you could imagine. He's bright and energetic, and you. Hinata's voice cut off abruptly, and Naruto could see that her left hand was clamped tightly around her right forearm on the table as she bit her lip and watched him nervously. Gently, he coaxed her to continue. What? Releasing a breath she had been holding, Hinata's eyes swam in sorrow. And you love him enormously. Again, that burning desire to simply remember flared to life in his chest. Before he was able to muster a response, a soft knock sounded from the front door. 3 soft, yet somehow authoritative raps. Not wanting to sit awkwardly at the kitchen table and wait for Hinata to return, he followed her, pausing in the archway to the living room where he could see the door, but not have to actually do anything. When Hinata opened the front door, Hinata Hyuga stood on the other side, a small, slumped body against his chest and a bright blonde head lolled on his shoulder. He fell asleep on the walk over, Hayashi told his daughter as he began the slow, delicate process of transferring a sleeping toddler from one person to another. Despite his care, little blue eyes blinked open lethargically and a small sleepy smile found its way onto Jiraiya's face. "Hi, Mama," he mumbled as he wrapped his small arms around her neck. Hinata smiled at him, placed a soft kiss on his golden hair, and then turned her attention back to her father to thank him when blue eyes met blue eyes and the sleepy look evaporated from Jiraiya's face like water in a fire. "Papa!" He called loudly and began to squirm vigorously in Hinata's arms, his little hands stretched out to Naruto. "Papa, are you feeling better? Can I have my hug now?" Naruto found himself pinned to the wall like a fly by 3 drastically varied stares. Jiraiya's young, bright, happy face shined at him with all the trust in the world. Behind him, the harsh glare of Hinata Hyuga simply dared him to make the wrong move and see how long he lasted. And lastly, despite trying to keep a solid grasp on her son so he wouldn't fall, the look in Hinata's eyes could only be described as dread. Naruto instantly understood from that look that she was terrified he would do something wrong by mistake and shatter her son's heart. Mentally bracing himself, Naruto stepped forward and slipped his large hands under Jiraiya's little arms and lifted him away from Hinata, settling the little boy against his chest. "No, I'm not really feeling better," he answered honestly. "But you can always have a hug," he said seriously, smiling down at the little boy. The look of pure joy on that little face made Naruto's chest swell, and Jiraiya flung his arms around Naruto's neck and buried his little nose into his father's shoulder. Naruto was vaguely aware of Hinata saying goodbye to her father and closing the front door, but he was a bit busy trying to decipher Jiraiya's mumbles struggling past the fabric of his shirt. "I'm sorry you're not feeling better, Papa. But I'm glad you and Mama are back. I missed you. I didn't think I was gonna see you after the hospital when Mama said they didn't know what was wrong with you." Jiraiya's little body curled up against his chest and his little blonde head was tucked under Naruto's chin. His breathing began to deepen and Hinata held a finger to her lips and then beckoned him to follow. She led him to the second door in the hall, and Naruto gently laid the toddler on the bed when Hinata pulled the covers back. She tucked her son in, gently placing the little stuffed toad in his arm, and pressed a kiss to his forehead. "I love you, Froggy," she whispered quietly before following Naruto out the door. Once it had gently latched, her shoulders slumped, and she turned to Naruto. "Thank you?" The amount of emotion she managed to pack into those 2 words felt like a physical entity. "I'm sorry, I was hoping I wouldn't have to put you on the spot." "Don't apologize, Hinata," Naruto interrupted her softly. "None of this is your fault. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I can't be more help. I'm sorry I can't remember." "No, Naruto." It was her turn to cut him off apparently. "I know you wouldn't let this happen if it was a choice." Hinata paused for a beat, the sheer amount of love in her eyes nearly flooring him, before asking, "Can we decide something? Right now?" When Naruto nodded curiously, she continued, "Can we stop apologizing? Nothing is your fault, and I won't listen to you try to shoulder everything. And I have a sneaking suspicion that you won't let me do it either, she said, a small amused smile pulling at her lips. Naruto chuckled quietly and nodded, looking at his toes bashfully for a moment, wondering why he suddenly felt so shy in front of her, before returning his eyes to her face. So let's just decide now to not waste time saying how sorry we are. We have to deal with the situation anyway, and I don't want us to keep. She trailed off, waving a hand vaguely in the air, not quite knowing how to put her thoughts into words. Before she could work it out, Naruto was nodding. I agree. No more sorries. He said it seriously, but there was a hint of humor in his tone still. Hinata smiled up at him, and then heaved a sigh, tucking a long strand of dark hair behind her ear. It's late, we better get you settled. She slipped past him and into the main bedroom. Naruto loitered in the hall for a moment, not sure if he should follow her or not. When he did poke his head past the door frame, he saw that Hinata had turned down the right side of the bed, and was crouched down digging through a drawer. She stood after a moment, and, pushing the drawer closed with her foot, held out a folded shirt and pair of shorts. You like to sleep in these, usually, she told him. He noticed she had another wad of clothing in her other hand, and as he took the clothes she offered him, she said, I'll be on the couch if you need anything. Don't hesitate to get me if you do, and tried to sidle past him. Whoa, hold on a sec, he said, blocking her exit. Hinata, I can't take your bed. I'll crash on the couch, it'll be fine. She was already shaking her head before he finished. No, Lady Tsunade said you need to keep things as normal as possible. That means sleeping in here. And is you crashing on the couch normal? He countered. No, she admitted reluctantly. But it's not like you'll see me. It will just be like when I'm away on a mission, she reasoned, sounding sure of herself, like she had won. The idea of pushing Hinata out of her bed when he was already flipping everything else in her life on its head rankled at his masculine pride. It's a big bed. We could share. He knew she wouldn't back down and let him sleep on the couch, but there was no way he was booting her to it. Even so, he could barely mumble out his bold suggestion, his chin ducking into his chest bashfully. Hinata's surprise showed on her face before she looked at the carpet. I didn't want to make you uncomfortable, she admitted quietly. After this morning, it didn't seem like a very good idea. Naruto shrugged, hoping he came across as casually as he intended. It's not a big deal. I was just startled this morning. Besides, I think Jiraiya waking up and finding his mother on the couch would raise some difficult questions. He saw the moment Hinata admitted she didn't have any more excuses. If you're sure, she prodded a final time. Positive, he answered confidently, wishing he felt as sure as he sounded. She fidgeted for a moment before nodding once. All right. I need to put dinner away, though. You can shower, if you like, but then you should get to sleep. If you're going to keep your normal schedule, you'll need to be up early. Naruto allowed her to slip past him, her pajamas still in hand, and he decided a small friendly threat couldn't hurt. Okay, but if I wake up tomorrow and you're on the couch, you'll be in serious trouble, he said, a warning finger pointed at her. She chuckled softly, a sound Naruto instantly decided he liked, and answered yes, sir, before slipping into the kitchen. Feeling the grime from the day, traveling and then being stuck in the hospital, for the first time, Naruto decided to take up Hinata's offer of a shower before bed. Stepping into the bathroom, Naruto found a pair of fluffy, burnt orange-colored towels hanging on hooks by the tub. He turned the shower on to let the water heat up, and then quickly undressed. As he was about to step under the water, Naruto's eyes caught sight of the platinum band on his finger. He considered the ring for a moment before gently working it off his finger and setting it on the sink. He showered quickly, trying not to dwell on the fact that the manly shampoo and body wash, both half empty, were obviously his and, like everything else, had been carrying on so innocently before 5 years of his life decided to take a leave of absence. After he had stepped out of the water and shrugged into the pajamas, Naruto once again considered the wedding ring innocently staring up at him. He gently picked it up, examining it closely, a simple platinum band with a frosted ring around the middle. It was obviously well cared for, not a single scratch, and when Naruto's eyes were dragged to his hand he found a pale tan line on his finger where the band usually sat. Naruto had always been tan, but a slightly paler ring of skin circled the base of his ring finger. He debated for a moment whether or not he should continue to wear the ring. It was his, obviously, and he clearly wore it often, but Naruto could not even remember that this ring had existed, let alone the vows he had made when he had taken it. But it was a tie to his old life, he reasoned, and with the hope that, eventually, he would get that life back, Naruto slipped the ring on his finger before leaving the bathroom. He had been right before about the bed. This bed was awesome. It wasn't until he had sunken into the soft mattress that he realized just how exhausted he was. He stretched widely, flexing his fingers above his head and his toes under the comforter, and pressed his head down into the soft pillow before letting his body go completely limp. He listened carefully to the quiet noise coming from the kitchen. He was not going to let Hinata sleep on the couch. If that meant he had to drag her into the bedroom, then so be it. It turned out force wasn't needed. Hinata returned to the room, already dressed in her pajamas, a pair of long soft pants and a tank top, and tossed her dirty clothes into the hamper in the bathroom. She flipped off the light and then quietly slipped across the room to the other side of the bed and crawled in. By some unspoken consent, the two lay at the extreme ends of the bed, leaving plenty of space between them. Naruto tried to relax his tense body, vividly aware that one of his childhood friends was sharing the same blanket he was only 2 feet to his left. An incredibly gorgeous childhood friend he had somehow managed to miss up until this morning. Ignoring the snickering in his head that sounded suspiciously like a toad sage, Naruto rolled over, his back to Hinata, and tried to fall asleep. The next morning Naruto was very abruptly woken when the bedroom door flew open, banged against the wall, and a small hand wrapped around his fingers and began tugging incessantly. Aside from the determined toddler, the first thing Naruto noticed was that he had once again woken up wrapped around Hinata. Sometime during the night he had crept over to her side of the bed and nestled up against her back. His body spooned against hers with an arm around her waist, one under her head again, and his nose tucked into her hair just like the previous morning. Every part of his body except the arm tucked under her head flinched away from her, and he could feel his ears burn. And Jiraiya was still tugging on his hand. The kid was shouting something about breakfast, and when Hinata sat up she shooed him out of the room, promising to follow. Naruto sat up and rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly. "Sorry, Hinata. I didn't mean to maul you like that." She shrugged and smiled sweetly at him. "It's fine. In fact, it's a bit comforting to know that you remember me on some level, even if it is just unconsciously." Her unexpectedly cavalier attitude about the situation surprised Naruto. The blushing, stammering, awkward Hinata he remembered was nowhere to be found. "Mama!" Jiraiya called impatiently from the kitchen, banging something on the table. Hinata's quiet laugh bubbled up as she rose from the bed and slipped out of the room. Her face appeared around the doorframe again, her long hair hanging down past her shoulder, and she said, "Besides, I thought we'd agreed to stop apologizing." Before Naruto could think of an answer, she had disappeared again. Oh yes, this Hinata was another animal altogether different. Letting air whoosh out of his lungs, Naruto fell back against the pillows and dug his knuckles into his eyes. He wondered for a moment how often this scene had played out in the mornings over the past 2 years. It had a routine feeling to it, but in a good, comfortable way. Reluctant to leave the comfortable bed, it took probably more effort than should have been strictly necessary to roll out from under the covers. As he walked into the kitchen, Naruto saw Hinata once again at the counter mixing something in a bowl. Standing on a chair right next to her, Jiraiya leaned over her arm to watch, standing on his tiptoes and obviously in his mother's way chanting, "Waffles, waffles, waffles," quietly. Unsure of what to do, Naruto hovered in the doorway until Jiraiya spotted him. The toddler scrambled down from the chair and sprinted to his father, hurling himself at Naruto. It was only because he had seen the kid do the same thing at the hospital with Hinata that Naruto managed to catch him. "What's for breakfast?" Naruto asked, hoisting the toddler to his chest. Once again, Naruto felt completely out of his depth holding this toddler that looked so much like him. Although he loved kids and had always wanted children of his own, to literally have one hurled into his arms was something no one could prepare themselves for. Luckily, Jiraiya was completely unaware of the worries that plagued his father. Jiraiya threw his hands into the air as he shouted waffles, and proceeded to attempt a strange little jig in Naruto's arms. Naruto entertained Jiraiya while Hinata cooked, and soon enough the little family was sitting down to eat. "So, what's on the schedule for today?" Naruto asked before taking a bite of his waffle. Hinata looked over at him briefly as she tried to keep Jiraiya as clean as possible while he ate. Well, you usually train for a few hours if you don't have a mission." Naruto nodded as he chewed and swallowed. That sounded like him, training every chance he got. At least some things hadn't changed. "Is there anyone I usually train with, or a particular spot I work at?" he asked before taking another bite. Hinata thought for a moment before answering. "You usually spar with whoever is available, but I don't know if you had made any plans to train with anyone before we left. You still train at Team 7's grounds, though. We can head over after breakfast if you want." Naruto nodded and then really tucked into his breakfast with the same enthusiasm as Jiraiya. Chapter 4. Hinata and Naruto walked side by side through the village to the training grounds, keeping a close eye on Jiraiya as he ran ahead of them and back over and over. Hinata pointed out streets and shops on the way and poked and prodded his memory, hoping something would click, but nothing did. The more he reached and fell short, the more frustrated Naruto became. His temper was beginning to spark at the edges when Hinata suddenly backed off. She turned forward to call Jiraiya back to them, warning him not to get so far ahead. Naruto tried to steel himself against the next prod, but it never came. Glancing to Hinata, he found her walking beside him, just as before, but paying him no attention. Instead, her face was turned up to the growing sunlight, her hands clasped behind her as they walked. She said nothing, allowing him a small reprieve, and Naruto found himself unable to find the words to thank her. Their attention returned abruptly to the toddler still some ways ahead of them on the dirt path when Jiraiya rounded the edge of the trees and squealed before bolting out of sight, his little arms waving around his head. "Oh no!" Hinata murmured, her entire body tensing, more to herself than to Naruto. "What?" he asked, concerned by her sudden shift in mood. Before she could answer, they heard a cheerful voice greet Jiraiya and another laugh from the toddler. As they rounded the last few trees, Naruto's old training ground opened up before them, and at the far end by the memorial stone 3 teenagers grouped around the wooden posts. 2 boys leaned or sat against the posts, and a girl with bright amber hair was swinging Jiraiya up in the air. "Who are they?" he asked Hinata, quietly. She hesitated a moment, her hands clasped together at her waist. They're your Genin team." He should have expected it. He shouldn't have been surprised. But the idea that he had a Genin team was a bit absurd, honestly. He stopped walking, staring wide-eyed at the 3 teenagers across the field. How could his life have changed so drastically in only 5 years? Naruto ran a tan hand through his hair, tugging on the blonde strands for a moment before sighing. "Okay, who's who?" he asked tiredly. Hinata cast a worried glance toward the 3 teens playing with her son before meeting Naruto's eyes. "They all made Chunin last year, but you still run missions with them and train together often. There's Itsuki Aburame, in the light jacket, and then Katsu and Kyoto are twins. Kyoto is the girl, with the red hair. She's a lot like you with the biggest personality of the 3. Katsu is more reserved and people have compared him to Sasuke, but I wouldn't suggest bringing it up because he doesn't like it. Itsuki is the medic for your team." As Hinata mentioned things about each individual, Naruto's eyes roved over each person. Her description fit what he saw at first glance. Kyoto was standing a little apart from the boys playing with Jiraiya. She would swing him up into the air and tickle him, and then run away when he threatened to do the same. Both boys leaned casually against the wooden posts in front of the memorial stone but watched their teammate and the toddler closely. Naruto caught each member of the team watching him and Hinata as well. The girl and the Aburame glanced at them, but otherwise waited patiently. The other boy, however, seemed to have trouble keeping his attention on the toddler and his sister. His eyes returned to Naruto and Hinata before darting away repeatedly. Naruto shrugged and nodded in the direction of the team. "Guess we'd better get this over with. That boy looks pretty suspicious." Hinata's hands were clasped together, and she looked a little nervous, but she nodded and led him toward the teenagers. When they were closer, the girl, Kyoto, looked up from where she had pinned Jiraiya to the ground to tickle him, and shouted, "Hey, Naruto-sensei! We were wondering where you were. You're usually not this late. Hey, Hinata-sensei!" Hinata stepped forward and visibly forced herself to relax, forcing her hands to her sides. "We need to tell you all something," she said quietly. Her voice was as soft as ever, but it immediately grabbed each ninja's attention. Naruto watched as each one straightened and turned to her, almost ready for trouble it seemed. Feeling a tug on the hem of his shirt, Naruto looked down to see Jiraiya staring up at him with those big blue eyes. "Can I go play?" he asked, and once Naruto nodded he took off to the middle of the field. Naruto let Hinata do the talking. She laid out the facts and explained everything they knew quickly, and Naruto was impressed to see his team waited until she was finished before asking questions rather than interrupting. "So," Kyoto began, "you're telling us he doesn't remember anything about us at all?" She phrased her question more as a statement, and didn't seem overly concerned by Naruto's medical situation. When Hinata nodded, a bright smile split Kyoto's lips, flashing white teeth, and she turned to Naruto with a small bounce. "Wanna spar then?" she asked excitedly. "Kyoto, he doesn't remember anything," Hinata repeated, a worried expression beginning to settle on her face. "I heard that," she assured. "But Lady Hokage said other than your memory you're fine, right?" she asked, directing her question at Naruto. "She even wants you to keep up your normal routine, and sparring with us is normal. So you up for it, sensei? Or are you worried you'll get your ass handed to you?" Naruto decided right then he liked Kyoto very much. She had a spunk and fire that reminded him of himself, and he wasn't about to back down to some little chunin whelp he had trained, memory or not. "Not on your life, runt. Let's go." The smirk that settled on Kyoto's face was only slightly terrifying. Hinata heaved an exasperated sigh and shook her head. "Don't be too hard on him, Kyoto. He doesn't remember anything." "You kidding, Hinata? This is gonna be payback for every prank he pulled and every crappy D-rank he sent us on." She smiled warmly at Hinata and then led the way to the middle of the field, shooing Jiraiya back to his mother. Naruto took his place opposite the girl warily. He had no idea what he was in store for and decided to be cautious. If there was one thing fighting Madara had taught him, it was to always be wary of an unknown opponent. Immediately, Naruto began analyzing Kyoto. His own style relied on a combination of literally every style he had ever seen. When he saw a move he liked, Naruto took it, tweaked it a little, most often with shadow clones, and then sent it back at his opponent. Watching another style was practically second nature now. Kyoto took a stance incredibly similar to his. Her feet were set wide, but not too far, just a solid stance, ready for action. She smirked at him and waited a moment before charging straight at him. "Hey, wait a second!" he yelped, leaping to the side to avoid a kunai aimed at his gut. "We didn't say what the rules were. Are we playing with ninjutsu or just straight up taijutsu?" In answer, Kyoto's hands flashed through a few hand signs and a small wall of water rose from the river to Naruto's left and surged toward him at surprising speed. He frowned, recognizing the defensive technique, and easily sidestepped it. Why the hell was she using a defensive jutsu as offense? Naruto knew he didn't have much room to complain, considering his go-to jutsu was originally designed as a stealth and recon technique that he used in a completely inappropriate manner, but still, he had the means to do it. If Kyoto was going to use a water wall as an attack, she needed to make it overwhelmingly huge, many times larger than what she had. Again, Kyoto came charging at him, tossing a handful of shuriken ahead of her, and driving him toward the river. Naruto allowed it, still feeling her out, getting a sense for her style. So far he had decided she tried to be a heavy hitter, like him or Lee, but she simply didn't have the power behind it. He hadn't really traded blows with her in taijutsu beyond the few hits when she had charged him, but judging by her jutsu, she just didn't have the ability to make everything an offensive attack. Stepping onto the river, Naruto continued to retreat, biding his time before he went on the offensive. Kyoto followed him closely, throwing kicks and punches fast, and Naruto was pleased to see she had a very good technique and understanding of hand-to-hand combat. Her form was good, and she didn't waste much movement unnecessarily. Again, she jabbed at him, a kunai sailing toward his gut, and Naruto slammed the back end of his own kunai into her wrist, sparking the nerve and forcing her hand to open on a reflex as it dragged the kunai down. Kyoto had leapt 5 feet away from him before the kunai even hit the water, and her hands were flashing through seals again. On pure instinct, Naruto glanced behind him and saw a water prison rise out of the river. It hovered for a moment, and then hurtled toward him, like a wrecking ball. Taking a deep breath, Naruto cut off the chakra to his feet and plummeted into the river. "What the hell?" he asked her silently. Why in Kami's name was she using a freaking water prison as an offensive attack? If she was going to go to the effort of pumping that much chakra into forming the prison, she might as well use it for its intended purpose and trap him in it rather than try to bowl him over. Naruto formed a familiar cross with his fingers and a shadow clone popped into existence next to him. The clone swam under Kyoto to get in position and Naruto shot back to the surface, a few shurikens slicing through the water toward the teen before he surfaced. Naruto found his footing quickly, but had to leap out of the way as Kyoto sent a water shuriken at him. Kyoto's hands began to speed through more hand signs when a pair of hands locked around her ankles and forcibly yanked her down into the water before launching her toward the shore. Naruto chased after her, his clone rising out of the water to follow, and the pair flanked her as she rolled to her feet. Naruto growled as again, Kyoto's hands formed a hand sign. "I swear, if you send another damn defensive jutsu at me, I will Rasengan your ass," he threatened. Kyoto laughed, and said, "Well, what do you know, sensei, you're not totally gone." Before Naruto could register what she meant, Kyoto's body flickered to immediately in front of him. Her fist was sailing toward his face and Naruto didn't have time to think. His body took over. In a fraction of a moment, chakra pooled in his belly, spreading like fire to his entire body, and then it was gone. Naruto blinked, watching as Kyoto swung a fist at empty air across the field. His shadow clone tackled her from behind, using his much larger frame to pin her to the ground, holding her head down to the grass. Naruto blinked again, looking down to where he stood. He crouched atop the center post by the memorial stone, one hand pressed flat to the wood, and again he looked up to Kyoto on the other side of the field. Naruto stood, looking back down at his feet, and saw a seal burned into the wood under where his hand had been. A Horatian seal. Holy shit! Naruto felt like his eyes were about to burst out of his head. He had just performed the damn Horatian without even thinking about it. Since the moment Naruto had seen his father and the second Hokage use the technique, Naruto had discovered a burning desire to learn the jutsu. It had been one of the deciding factors in going to the Hidden Cloud to train with Killer Bee right after the war. And he had just used it on sheer instinct. Naruto leapt off the post, backflipping to the ground and whooping loudly. He landed in a roll and lay spread eagle on the grass, staring up at the clouds, his mind reeling. Without any warning, Jiraiya was suddenly in the air above him, a cheer bursting from his mouth as he body slammed Naruto, his small body thumping onto his chest. Jiraiya squirmed on his chest, twisting to look Naruto in the eye, a huge smiling lighting up his eyes. "You flew, Papa!" he shouted excitedly, laughing madly. From across the field, a far less amused shout reached him. "Sensei! Call off your damn clone already! You win!" Naruto lifted his head from the grass to see Kyoto's small frame was still pinned under his clone, who was reclining on her back and inspecting the nails on one hand. With barely a thought, Naruto released the clone and memories flooded him. He watched from a different perspective as Kyoto flickered to him, and a moment later he simply wasn't in front of her anymore. A huge, stupid grin split his face again and a laugh bubbled up from his chest. A shadow fell over his face and Naruto looked up to see the faces of 3 teenagers and Hinata staring back at him. He locked eyes with Hinata. "I can do the freaking Horatian?" He wrapped his arms around Jiraiya and rolled into a sitting position, his eyes still on Hinata. She nodded back at him and said, "You learned it a year ago. You have seals all over the village. I didn't think you would be able to use it without your memory, but I guess it's one of those body memories Kurama mentioned." Naruto laughed again, adrenaline still flooding his system. Katsu was frowning at him, looking deeply upset about something. "You really don't remember?" he asked quietly, his dark eyes drilling holes into Naruto. "Don't remember what?" Everyone looked down at Jiraiya, suddenly remembering he was there. The toddler twisted in Naruto's lap to look up at him, and asked again. Don't remember what, Papa? Naruto froze, trying to think up an excuse. Hinata saved him once again. Nothing, Froggy. Why don't you go play again? I think us adults are going to talk about some boring things for a while. Jiraiya made a face, sticking his tongue out, and then scrambled out of Naruto's lap. He made strange crashing noises as he sprinted forward and then froze, striking a pose, and then doing it again as he ran across the training ground, and Naruto realized he was pretending to use the Haraishin. Hinata turned to the Chunin, still huddled around Naruto. Please, don't mention anything about Naruto's memory loss in front of Jiraiya. I still haven't figured out how to explain it, and I don't want him to get hurt. Kyoto and Itsuki nodded, and Katsu looked at the ground, his toe digging a hole in the grass. Sorry, Hinata-sensei. It's just strange. His dark eyes met Naruto's for a brief moment, searching, before he looked away again hurriedly. The uncomfortable silence rankled at Naruto, and he decided to try to ease the tension. So how long have you kiddies been my genin? He asked, forcing an easy smile on his lips, the old mask settling into place. Naruto had always been good at hiding when he was troubled. The Aburame spoke for the first time. We were all promoted to Chunin 7 months ago at the exams in Suna. We are not your genin anymore. He spoke softly, but Naruto could hear the pride in his voice as he informed Naruto of his rank, and the hint of apology that Naruto didn't entirely understand. Was the kid sorry they had been promoted? Naruto shrugged up at the teenager. You may have earned Chunin rank, but there's something special about a sensei and his team. You never really outgrow it. I may not remember it, but you three will always be my cute little genin. As Naruto said it, he felt the truth of it. These kids were his and he would always try to help them. He watched as any lingering worries left Kyoto's and Itsuki's expressions, and even Katsu seemed a little relieved. You four became the new Team 7 a little over 3 years ago, Hinata informed him. Naruto mulled that over, wondering what had changed 3 years ago. Naruto had never thought about taking a team. He'd never had the time, between training himself, working with Jiraiya and then the war breaking out. Naruto's 2 main goals had consisted of becoming Hokage and bring Sasuke home, not necessarily in that order. The missing pieces that had led him to a wife, a son, and a genin team had not even been conceived as part of the picture. After the war had been won, Naruto's first intention had been to find Sasuke. The Uchiha had managed to slip away in the confusion of victory, and Naruto had wanted nothing more than to take off after him. Politics had gotten in the way, as they always do. Although peace had been established and the nations had united, it was a tenuous footing. The leaders and shinobi of the elemental lands had forged bonds in the face of death, and would defend them with their lives, but the civilians had not. The civilian population still harbored grudges and hate for their foreign neighbors, and talking them around was going to take a lot of work. As the face of the alliance, Naruto had been drafted, and so had begun traveling to the foreign lands. His plan had been to find Sasuke as soon as he finished, but something had obviously come up, and now he was a sensei. He briefly wondered if he was any good at it, or if some catastrophe was just waiting in the wings, biding its time before it ripped his team apart. It seemed to be the legacy of Team 7, from Old Man Third's team losing Orochimaru down to poor Kakashi losing Sasuke. Team 7 carried a tragic history. Hiding the worries and fear tumbling inside his mind, Naruto grinned up at his team. Well, are we any good? He asked cheerily. Kyoto laughed, and nodded. We're the best, she answered cockily. However, speaking of teams... Her voice trailed off as she glanced between Katsu and Itsuki. Yes, we had best be on our way, the Aburame said quietly. Naruto frowned a little. Despite the unexpectedness, he was beginning to look forward to getting to know his team. What's the rush? We have a mission, Katsu answered. We were beginning to doubt if you would show before we had to leave. Although he was disappointed, Naruto couldn't fault them for having work to do. He may have felt like he'd been dropped into this labyrinth of a new life, but for everyone else today was just another day. When do you get back? Hinata asked. Katsu told her it wouldn't be for a few days, and she nodded in understanding. Well, when you get home I'll make you all dinner. It's been a while since you've all been over. The three younger shinobi all agreed heartily, and then said their farewells and left. Naruto turned to Hinata and heaved out a breath. That wasn't so bad. She arched her eyebrows a bit uncertainly, but gave him a small smile. I'm sorry. All of these things keep springing up before I can think of them, and then you have to deal with them. I thought we agreed no sorries. Naruto chided her gently. He rose to his feet, facing her, and dug his hands into his pockets. None of this is your fault, Hinata. And I'm getting used to it. I don't think I'd even be surprised if you told me Sasuke had come back to the village. Naruto said it cynically, a dark chuckle accompanying the comment. A moment after he said it, Naruto noticed Hinata's silence, and looked up from the ground to stare at her profile as she avoided his eyes. She peeked at him guiltily from under the fringe of her bangs, and Naruto felt his knees give out a little. He stared at her for a moment more. You're kidding, he said, grasping at straws. No way in hell. Hinata bit her bottom lip, and Naruto could tell that she was debating how much she could tell him. He blinked at her owlishly for a moment, and then nodded decisively once. Nope, he said. I was wrong. I'm not getting used to it, and I can definitely still be surprised. When did that happen? About 3 years ago. You never really told me the details and I never bothered to ask, so I don't know how you did it. Hinata was watching him carefully, speaking softly and gently, trying to soothe him. Naruto rubbed the bridge of his nose as a headache built up behind his eyes. They had gotten a late start this morning, but it was barely past noon. All he wanted was to go back to bed. He rubbed his hands over his face and took a deep breath. He spoke through his hands. Is he in the village? Hinata shrugged. I'm not sure. He may have taken a mission. We can stop by his apartment and see if you'd like. Naruto considered her offer for a moment before shaking his head. No, I'll deal with him later. I don't think I'm ready for that confrontation. Naruto laughed darkly, finding the irony amusing. Of course, after wanting nothing more than to see Sasuke again, now that the opportunity had arrived, Naruto found himself unprepared for it. Tell me more about my team. Kyoto and Itsuki seemed to roll with the punches, but Katsu seemed pretty thrown off by all of this. Hinata nodded, looking a little upset herself. He would take it the hardest. Itsuki is an Aburame. There isn't much that can throw them off balance, and Kyoto is like you. Nothing seems to faze her, she's always ready for the next hit. Katsu has a harder time, especially because it's you. He and Kyoto are orphans, and since you've become their sensei, you and Katsu have become very close, almost like your relationship with Iruka or Jiraiya sensei. Naruto grimaced, rubbing the back of his neck. No wonder he's so upset. I don't even want to think what it would be like if Iruka or the pervy sage forgot who I was. Gah! This sucks. Why is this happening to me? Naruto's temper flared, and before he could stop himself, a Rasengan had formed, and he had launched it into a tree over Hinata's shoulder. I finally win the war, the village actually accepts me, my life is good, I'm happy, and then everything gets shot to hell. Why can't I catch a break? Naruto focused on Hinata, not really expecting an answer but wishing she would have one. To his surprise, she didn't look shocked by his outburst. If anything, she looked sad. He immediately felt bad, remembering that it wasn't just his life that had been thrown off course. However, even as the guilt welled up, a small portion of anger did as well at the complete understanding that seemed to pour off Hinata in waves. The familiarity she had around him was like a two-edged sword. On the one hand, it was comforting, reminding Naruto that he wasn't alone in this mess. However, it also made him acutely aware that he should be offering the same comfort and support, and he didn't know how. It was frustrating to feel that someone knew him, inside and out, perfectly, and not know them in return. Hinata didn't say anything as the emotions battled inside of him, and probably across his face. She simply waited patiently until he had regained control of his temper. Once he had, she finally spoke. Maybe we should do something to get your mind off of things. How about we go home and I'll make you some ramen and red bean soup? The offer sounded fantastic, and after the strain on his emotions of meeting his team and learning that Sasuke had returned to the village, Naruto accepted readily. The rest of the day was spent at home. Once they had reached the apartment, Jiraiya had run inside, leapt onto the couch, turned on his favorite cartoon, and promptly fell asleep. Naruto helped Hinata cook, enjoying the simplicity and something he had always liked doing, and quizzed her, playing 20 questions about their other friends and comrades. While avoiding the subject of Sasuke, Naruto learned that he and Hinata hadn't been the only ones to take unexpected paths with their lives. Apparently Shino had married Kiba's older sister Hana. Naruto had been sure Hinata was joking until she pulled out a photo album and promptly flipped to a page with various photos plastered under the clear screen. Right in the center, Shino had an arm wrapped around a feral-looking woman with the telltale marks of the Inuzuka clan, the tiniest of smiles playing across his lips. Hinata's surprises didn't stop there as she told him Kiba was very involved with a civilian girl, Lee was dating Ayam from Ichiraku, and Shikamaru was engaged to Temari of the Sand. Despite his begging to be told in detail how each and every one of those relationships had come about, Hinata had adamantly refused, insisting that Tsunade had said not to tell him any stories. He huffed and grumbled after each refusal, which only succeeded in making Hinata laugh, and continued to question her about changes in the village, secretly grateful she was so patient and kept putting up with his relatively bad attitude. Not for the first time, Naruto considered how lucky he was to have ended up where he was. Hinata was incredible, and he didn't know what he would do if she wasn't here with him.